Good morning, Mr. Costens. Welcome to this dialogue. The organizer gave this title to us for us to discuss. The title is Digital Economy and FinTech, Efficiency, Stability, and Fairness. I think this is a very good title. And a lot of digital technology is having a great impact on the financial sector, and it creates a lot of opportunities. It certainly has the potential to enhance efficiency. At the same time, there are also challenges. Some of the challenges are concerned with fairness, whether competition is somewhat adversely affected by the development of the digital technology in the financial sector. Whether it has, we don't know the impact of it on stability. So I think that this title is a great title for us to have a discussion. However, before we dive deeper into this issue, I would like to ask a question that is slightly different from this theme. That is the normalization of monetary policy in advanced economies. How will this affect emerging markets? How do emerging markets like China prepare for the normalization of monetary policy in advanced economies?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bai, for spending this time with me. And well, of course, it's a real pleasure for me to participate.
It's my pleasure as well.
In this Bond Summit, as I have been saying frequently, I definitely would have loved to be in Beijing in this event. Hopefully next time we will be able to meet in person. Well, the question you made it's a key question. I would say it is probably the most relevant issue that now central banks and authorities are pretty much meditating about to establish a plan. As we all know, the COVID-19 imposed or represented a major health shock to the world economy, and the solution to it required pretty much bringing the economic activity to a standstill in many different aspects, and to bridge the situation at the beginning of last year to better times. It was essential to implement very aggressive fiscal, monetary, and regulatory policies at least. And this was mostly to prevent that the real shock to the economy would convert itself into financial crisis. So this called for massive fiscal, monetary, and regulatory policies. And we can say that so far, so good. As a matter of fact, probably what we have seen is a better development than what we anticipated some years ago. Monetary policy has been tremendously expansionary in key advanced economies, also in some emerging market economies. I would say that the strength of monetary frameworks in emerging market economies, together with the liquid injection that advanced economy central banks generated, allowed precisely emerging markets also to implement some unconventional monetary policies. But well, as it is always in life, things have to come to an end, and well, fiscal and monetary policies at least have some limits. I would say that the impact on liquidity, the impact on the level of interest rates, the availability of finance has been really adequate. but we knew from the beginning that this was not going to come without a cost, and the cost could be in the form of inflation to some extent, and also the potential of financial instability. As the recovery has picked up and as it has picked up steam, we have seen higher prices, many in commodity prices, but also some associated with bottlenecks and also the natural disruption that comes with stopping the economy in many sectors and then get it going again. There are many relative price changes, and these relative price changes in the short term has to pretty much manifest in higher inflation. So I would not say that we are moving into a higher permanent inflation scenario, but yes, there are some increases in measured inflation. And so far, what we think here at the BIS is that this increase in inflation is transitory, but that doesn't take away that central banks need to be very vigilant, and therefore they need to start preparing the ground to remove this extraordinary accommodation. At the same time, we know that the plentiful liquidity also induces the canalization of resources to financial markets, oftentimes to risky endeavors. And even though we still feel that the financial stability is not threatened, yes, we have seen very rich markets, and it would be important to start considering removing some of the liquidity that is out there to assure financial stability as we move into the future. So the central banks, I think the main central banks have learned their lesson in the GFC, in the great financial crisis. They learned their lessons that their intervention need to be fast, need to be really overwhelming to produce the results that were pursued, and this really happened. But also they have learned their lesson from the point of view that they need to let the markets know with plenty advance, so that this would not, at the end of the day, imply a surprise in the markets and to generate a massive volatility, as it happened, for example, in 2013 and 14 with the taper tantrum. So I think that part has been appropriate. Now, yes, emerging markets tend to be more sensible to changes in global monetary conditions. I would say among the central banking community, it was clear that this could not go forever. And I would say that the COVID shock came at the time where the monetary policy frameworks of many emerging markets was very, very strong. I would say if we compare the situation with 2013-14, many central banks accumulated more reserves, introduced a little bit more flexibility to their exchange rate. In a way, they had more control over their inflation and their financial stability conditions. So this allowed them in the very short term also to accompany the actions of advanced economies with a more lax monetary policy, but also I think gives them a much better situation to start adjusting their monetary policy stance now that it starts that global financial conditions start reverting. The key aspect here is precisely for the central banks to have the ability to use their enriched or enhanced toolbox they have We have done a lot of work in the BIS together with authorities, including the PBOC and other central banks in Asia, to analyze how precisely a more integrated policy framework could be used as a guideline to face external shocks as the one we're talking about. And that includes the possibility of using international reserves to smooth the impacts on the exchange rate, to obviously to use monetary policy, to use the balance sheets of the central bank, to use macro and micro prudential regulation, and at some point even capital flow management, capital account management. Close coordination with fiscal authorities is of the essence, but I feel that the central banks are well prepared, in particular the ones in Asia. It will be a difficult time because, yes, to remove, I mean, I would say that the anesthesia that the very generous liquidity injection by the global central banks have produced was beneficial. But now that anesthesia is being removed, tough actions or tough decisions will, in some cases, will need to be taken. But I feel that the central banks in the world, in emerging markets, are well prepared. And I would say that one that has done a very good job, also facing local issues, is the PBOC. I think that it has facilitated the restart of the Chinese economy. Together with the US, China and the US are sort of the engines of growth in the world. But I know that you are very you are a real expert also on these subject matters. You also participated in some of the policy making fora in PBOC, so I don't know if you share my point of view.
Yes, I think the Chinese central bank is working very hard to deal with some of the potential risks. And as you know, since the international financial crisis, China has implemented a huge fiscal stimulus, and a lot of the investment projects were financed by debt. And so that accumulation is a potential risk. So far, I think the central bank and the financial regulators have been doing a very good job in dealing with this issue, but we have to be very vigilant about potential risks. So this is one thing the central bank is doing, and this is the challenge we face. And in the longer run, I think I'm quite optimistic about the Chinese economic growth prospect. And then we face a few long-standing issues that needs to be solved. One is how to make it easier for small and medium enterprises to get capital. And here, this is very much related to today's topic. I think the help of fintech can help credit allocation to become more efficient. And there are examples where fintech has been helping to reduce risks. However, with fintech, with a lot of the digital economy, digital technology-driven enterprises, they tend to be concentrated. And that may cause concerns about the degree of competition, about fairness, even about systematic stability. When you have so large players, they can be systematically important. So we need to find ways to deal with these concerns. This is new to everybody, not only financial regulators in China are facing this new issue. I think all over the world, this is something something new. So we realize some of the problems, we are learning to deal with them. And in the learning process, and coordination between different regulators, learning from other countries' experiences is going to be really important. And so this brings us to today's main topic, digital economy and fintech. One of the very important aspects of fintech is central bank digital currency. And a lot of people are very interested in this issue. For the time being, central bank digital currency is still in the experimental stage. And people are interested in when it comes to the implemental stage, what are the key issues that we need to address to make the implementation successful?
Well, certainly central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is a key issue that central banks are addressing nowadays. If we think about it today, the way central banks relate to society, the most obvious way and the most immediate or tangible way is by cash. In every country there is cash, and society use it every day, and cash is taken for granted, but I think it's a great invention of humanity. Now, of course, the use of cash and the payment systems have been evolving as there has been this magnificent digital revolution. So precisely what CBDC tries to do is to provide society with a superior representation of money that would be more in line with the times. Society, they don't want necessarily to use cash. They want to use their mobile phones, different forms of applications to do their transactions. And in that sense, I would say that central banks will need to respond and provide trusted money in a digital form. Some people ask, why do we need a CBDC when the private sector could be offering already some of the digital means of payment? The key issue is that only CBDC has the trust and has all the institutional support that the central bank can provide. I would say, is the most trusted element, a more trusted representation of money, and it is fair and it is necessary for central banks to offer that opportunity to society. So I think that's why it is important to move in this direction, and that's why most central banks are working very hard towards this. Now, your question is very relevant because you have to say, well, if it is so important, why is it not out there? The issue is that it's not so simple. It's a tremendously difficult task. What central bank money is really meant to be is to be an infallible type of money. It really has to work extremely well. The system cannot go down. The allocation of CBDCs, the mapping from individuals to accounts is of the essence. The use of it in society is also very complex. The relationship with other means of payments is also fundamental. How would this work in the context of a payment system that in most countries is based on commercial bank money? How will you coordinate or complement central bank money with commercial bank money? That's a key question we need to address. Also, let's put it in this way. It opens other opportunities that today we don't have. For example, today we cannot pay interest on cash. what 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 would be the right thing to do in terms of a central bank digital currency. There is also other important aspects that today, is not an issue because this question was not even essential hundreds of years ago. But what do you do with all the information that a CBD system would provide? I think people value their privacy, and certainly is an issue that will need to be taken into account. I would say another thing that central banks are taking it very seriously is that, if you think in history, the payment systems we have today were evolved in a very gradual fashion through many, many decades. And we sort of were mounting applications and new features on legacy platforms. CBDC and technology allows us to have a major grand redesign. I mean, we can come with new rails where to provide a very important infrastructure where other participants, not only central banks, could complement their design and make a far more efficient and competitive payment systems. And I'm also thinking in the international dimension. Today, for example, as you know very well, correspondent banking, remittances, cross-border payments are extremely inefficient, not very transparent, and very, very costly. In many cases, especially for retail transactions, it can take up to 30 days to do the transaction, and it can cost you up to 5, 6, 7% of the amount paid. So that's tremendously inefficient, very taxing, and I think it's something that we need to address. The FSB and others are dealing with this, and the PBOC and the Chinese government is a very active participant in all these fora. But if we think about it, this technological revolution, what really allows us is to think in a great new design where everything, all the countries sort of simultaneously are thinking in the same direction, and therefore it could be designed in such a way that many of the obstacles and problems that we face today would be completely eliminated. It's an historical opportunity to start with a clean slate, not only from the domestic point of view, but also from the international point of view. So the BIS, as our how would I say it, our mandate is to facilitate and to enhance collaboration and cooperation among central banks. We have a BIS Innovation Hub where the CBDC is a very important topic, and we have more than a dozen central banks working already under the umbrella of the hub to promote issues related to central bank digital currencies.
Okay, thank you. As an individual, one may worry about privacy issues, as you mentioned. And I think we also very much look forward to the reduction in transaction cost when you make cross-border payments, as you mentioned. But for the whole global financial system as a whole, what do you think about the impact of central bank digital currency on the stability of the global financial system? When money flows more easily, is it going to cause some concerns about the stability?
Well, I think precisely to meditate on how can we have control over those issues, it is important this process of cooperation and collaboration across countries. The run against the domestic currency at the end of the day does not depend only on technology. As a matter of fact, doesn't depend on technology. It depends more on the domestic policies, on the prospects of a country, and that will not change. But to have new rails could make that some reallocation of assets across countries could be more destabilizing in shorter periods of time. So I think in the design of these instruments, new rails, I think that we need to consider this. Now, one reason why it is also important, from my point of view, to develop CBDC is that because, as you have seen it already in China, private sector developments through big techs and so on can be very, very important, and they themselves could be destabilizing. So I think it's better to have at least an additional system, a parallel system that works with principles and policies that are well grounded, that they are in the hands of the authorities, and that can give more, I would say, to assure stability and to provide a more even development of the financial system.
Okay, great, thank you. And you mentioned that with central bank digital currency, and it's potentially possible for the central bank to charge interest rates on central bank, to pay interest rate on central bank money. And it can also create a negative interest rate in a way. For paper currency, you cannot have negative interest rate. But for digital currency, potentially you can do that. And also digital currency, the use of central bank digital currency gives the policymaker much more information they can use to make policies. Besides these, how do you think about the effect of central bank digital currency on monetary policy, on the transmission of monetary policy, on the effectiveness, and how is this going to affect how people view monetary policy?
No, I think this is very important. It's something that we need to think it also in the context of the design of the system. Needless to say, if you introduce a new asset of this or a new representation of money, it will change the traditional relationships that exist there and that are implied in all the transmission mechanisms of monetary policy. From how much people hold liquid assets versus non-liquid assets, how sensitive is the economy to changes in interest rates. In many countries, the exchange rate is also very, very responsive and is very important for the transmission mechanism. So that will need to be taken into account. How much disintermediation of banking activity could CBDC introduce? So all that will need to be taken into account. Now, one interesting thing, I know that you're a mathematician and a very good economist. The design of this system brings many parameters, I would say, that central banks and authorities could adjust to make the system work as close as possible as what would be a balanced system in which we obtain the results we're looking for, which is to have more efficient, trustworthy payments means, but at the same time that it doesn't generate destabilizing disintermediation, that it doesn't enhance the probability of a run against the currency, where also the financing to small and medium-sized firms is not being implemented. So that's why your question of implementation is key, because we will need to think how to parameterize this system in such a way that we can obtain the whole of the results we want.
Okay, thank you. And central bank digital currencies is one aspect of the digital economy. The digital technology is affecting the economy in many different ways. And one important characteristic of these digital technology-driven enterprises is that there is huge economies to scale. There's a huge amount of network externalities. As a result, you have large firms, very concentrated enterprises who has a big systematic impact on the whole society. And then since our title is about efficiency, about stability, about fairness. So here, people say, well, all this is good. It encourages innovation. And other people say, well, it's, it creates a monopoly. It's not fair. It can even deter innovation when other people work with these huge players, and the benefit from innovation may be not evenly shared or equitably shared. So, so these are some concerns. So regulations becomes necessary. But however, regulations has to balance the incentives for innovation and fairness on the other hand. What do you think are the best practices in regulation that best balance these concerns?
Well, that's a key question. That's one of the top issues that is in the minds of many authorities. And well, you in China have given very concerted steps in this direction. One of the particular issues that we are facing is that innovation moves extremely fast. And as you mentioned, there are economies of scale, there are networks effects that allow systems that can start really small to become overwhelming in a matter of years.
Right.
And they are very, very, I would say, pernicious cycles that can be generated with a mix of technology and lack of adequate regulation, as we call it here in the BIS, the DNA cycle, which is the use of data in the context of networks that generate more activity, generate more data, more network effects, more activity, and it really crowds out many participants. And more than anything, if this process is being geared by companies that are not subject to the same type of regulation than incumbents, it can really affect the stability of the financial system. I mean, for example, if payment systems that start through big techs at some point branch out into credit using the information of the network and payments, they could have a competitive advantage against commercial banks that are subject to regulation. So we need to assure a level playing field. I think what is very important is that we have the same type of activity to subject to the same type of regulation, and at the same time also to and you in your words you have used several times the concept of systemic. I think many of these global or these big techs are systemic, and as we regulate systemic banks or systemic infrastructure in finance, I think that those concepts need to be applied also to the participation of big tech into financial activity. The issue is not to inhibit competition, is not necessarily to compete, to protect commercial banks. I think commercial banks will need also to develop their own infrastructure, and they should be able to provide the same type of services. But what as authorities we need to assure is that they compete on the same conditions. You know, there is not possibility of a regulatory arbitrage. So I think the aspects of the use of information, the tendency towards monopolies that is embedded in this process is also very important to be regulated, and also the different financial stability aspects that are involved in all of this. So yes, this is a key point, and we really should think about it.
Okay, Mr. Costans, thank you very much for this for your very insightful comments. And I think the issue we have discussed are important issues, and a lot of audience must be very interested in this. I'm confident that they benefit hugely from your comments and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.